I'm serving as interim director because our esteemed leader, Dr. James Allen Hall, is on a very well-earned sabbatical, writing poems and short stories and essays and answering texts from me that say things like, hold on, I've got one here. Hey boss, just got the new jacuzzi installed. Should the invoice be coded as supplies or professional development? Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce the award-winning novelist Andrew Mozina, but before we get to that, I would like to thank my colleagues at the Lit House, our assistant director, Amber Talianisic, our center coordinator, Linda Hamrick, and our master printer, Mike Kaler. I'd also like to thank this semester's student interns, Jessica Kelso, Alex Dodlin, Virgil Smithy, Hunter Mansfield, Ayana Jalen Harris, Maeve Powell, and Julie Nelson Gaudet. With James on sabbatical, they're all working very hard to keep our projects on track and our space organized, and I am thankful. I would also like to ask you to please silence your cell phones, if you would, and to share with you our land acknowledgement. The Rose O'Neill Literary House acknowledges this region as the original resource base of the Waikamis, the Choptank, and the Nanticoke, among other tribes. We acknowledge their painful history of genocide and forced removal. We honor the indigenous peoples still connected to this land and are committed to making our community a more equitable and inclusive place to gather and learn. Tonight, the Lit House will again be donating all proceeds from our sales of the beautiful broadside that Amber designed and Mike printed to support the Nanticoke in Millsboro, Delaware, where the remaining tribal members settled after being forced from this part of the Eastern Shore beginning in 1744. Our donation will be going to their college scholarship fund, which we are proud to support. Speaking of the broadside, it really is very striking, and we encourage you to buy one, as well as a copy of Andrew Mozina's latest novel, Tandem, at the table set up by our partner, The Bookplate, an independent bookstore here in Chestertown that many of you know and love. They sell the books and broadsides at all our events now. Thank you, Tess. Thank you, Becca. With that, I'd like to bring things around to our guest tonight, Andrew Mozina. Now, as a child, I had a series of terrible bicycles, and I spent a fair amount of time falling off of them. In my small town back then, we didn't believe in bike helmets or traffic laws or paying attention. So as an 8-year-old, I lost a tooth and a great deal of skin and 36 hours of short-term memory when my beach towel, which was picture this, billowing behind me in the wind as I rode down a hill on the way home from Jeff Peterson's house. You remember Jeff. And the towel was sucked down into the spokes of my bicycle. The next year, I suffered a frankly unspeakable accident when I hit a parked car head-on because I'd been distracted by a young woman in a bikini who was just existing on her front porch. The following year, I went over the handlebars when I tried to ride through a metal gate that was slightly narrower than those handlebars. All of those accidents were clearly my own fault, but sometimes I had help. The first time I was hit by a car while riding a bike, I was riding on the wrong side of the road, and a woman looked the right direction, which was not the direction I was coming from, and gunned it out of a parking lot, and I landed on the far side of a double yellow line of a 4-lane road. I had some trajectory. The second and third times I got hit by cars on a bike weren't that interesting. The fourth time I got hit by a car while riding a bike, I got in a fair amount of trouble with my parents because the police officer who hit me insisted on driving me home and telling my parents that I'd flown off the sidewalk right in front of him. And then my parents asked me why I did that. And I said, I don't know. Because I didn't. It was true, but it wasn't helpful. Those of you who've already read Andrew Mozina's latest book, Tandem, already know why I'm dwelling on these accidents. Those who haven't yet read the book and are wondering why I'm dwelling on these accidents, no reason. There are a lot of things I admire about Tandem, the biggest of which is its tonal modulation in the in the interest of rationalization. Here's a passage I liked. Her emotional turmoil, I'm quoting by the way, her emotional turmoil, not to mention her investment in their relationship, was more than he'd bargained for, but that was simply the burden of love. Her happiness was his happiness. Tu felicidad es mi felicidad. What if we all treated each other as if we'd really hurt each other and were trying to make up for it? What if we all treated each other as if we owed each other some great debt? And weren't we always in each other's debt because we hurt each other so often, even when we didn't mean to? Yes, he was onto something. He was fusing economic and moral principles in a way that very possibly was revolutionary. He knew his fellow macroeconomists would not accept the idea unless it was expressed in mathematical terms, so he scrawled an equation on a piece of Baymont stationery. B times G equals L. Bad faith multiplied by guilt equals love. It didn't capture everything. No series of equations could, of course, but it was a start. End quote. Just so you don't think that everything I say for the rest of my life is still from this book. I love the way that passage starts with a really delusional narrator's sort of small-minded approach to relationships and works its way up to something like wisdom, right? What if we all treated each other as if we owed each other some great debt? And then retreats through hubris and muddle and bad math and just keeps getting funnier all the time. That's a very good trick. Andrew Mozina is the author of 2 novels, Contrary Motion and Tandem, and 2 short story collections. Quality Snacks was a finalist for the Flannery O'Connor Award, and The Women Were Leaving the Men, good title, won the GLCA New Writers Award. His fiction has appeared in Tin House, Southern Review, Ecotone, the Missouri Review, and other likewise excellent literary magazines, and has received special citations in Best American Short Stories, Pushcart Prize, and News Stories from the Midwest. He and his wife, Lorraine Alberts, who's also here with us today, live in Kalamazoo, the one in Michigan, where he teaches literature and creative writing at Kalamazoo College. Please help me welcome to Chestertown and to the Lit House lectern, Andrew Mozina.
Wow, thanks, Roy. I've never had such a good introduction. Dang, that was awesome. Thank you for that. Thanks to Mike and Corey for hosting me here. And thanks to everybody here at the Lit House. James, who's not here, Roy, of course, and Amber and Linda. You got a great thing going here. It's very cool. And also, thank you to all of you for coming out. And I am just going to read a couple of sections from Tandem. This is a double point of view book. So I'll read the first chapter from Mike's point of view, who you've already kind of heard from, and then from Claire's point of view. This is right in my eye, but that's good in a way, I think. The sun was setting when Mike Kovacs pulled out of the parking lot of the Arcadia Brew Pub and entered what seemed like a reasonable gap in westbound traffic on Kalamazoo Avenue. A horn meat. Was it in front of him or behind him or coming from inside his head? He had one double IPA too many. There was something like 10% alcohol in those beers. Dinner with Dave and Sarah had been great. The mid-May evening was warm enough to sit on the pub's patio overlooking the swift and glittering Kalamazoo River. Fluffy dandelion seeds blew overhead, passing in and out of bands of horizontal sunlight. A folk guitarist sang incomprehensible lyrics through portable speakers with just the right feeling. Mike had feasted on smoked beef brisket, baked beans, and jalapeno cornbread. Bearded Dave told stories with fingers splayed. Angular Sarah made clipped, sardonic comments. They'd had some big laughs. Cutting through the mid-rise edge of downtown, the street became one way and picked up a third lane. Another horn sounded. Mike seemed to have drifted from his lane, or maybe he had not definitively chosen a lane. He would do so now. I accept that you had to meet your horn, he said aloud, darting his eyes into his rear view. A red Jeep veered out of the mirror, reappeared much larger on his left, and roared past him. My bad. He had become extremely happy during dinner, but when the patio filled like a swimming pool with shadow, Sarah had said, well, some of us have to work tomorrow, and grabbed her handbag from the weathered picnic table. Mike still got his beer, Dave observed. True, he had about half of a golden 20-ouncer in front of him. Serving sizes were trending larger across multiple beverage types. What did that say about supply? What did that say about demand? Mike foresaw a not-too-distant future when a standard beer would be 48 ounces, cost $30, and come in a Freon-lined tankard. He wondered if there was a way to get that vision on the record somewhere. No, I totally respect that, Mike said to Sarah with an ingratiating smile. It was a Thursday night after all, and though Dave and Mike didn't have to teach tomorrow, Sarah had to report for duty in her lab at Zoetis. Mike was tempted to leave his third beer, but he hated to waste resources, and it would be funny to chug the rest, just like one of his degenerate students. Mike, 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 Dave chanted while he guzzled. And even Sarah grinned when he'd slammed his empty glass down, eyes watering, and shook his head like a wet dog. Hanging out with Sarah and Dave gave Mike hope that things were finally getting back to normal after his divorce. They were the first couple he and Ann had really bonded with when they moved to Kalamazoo. Mike and Dave met at the college and brought them all together. Ann sold real estate and could be loud and silly. Sarah developed animal vaccines and was more wry and reserved. Yet, after taking Zumba classes together, Sarah and Ann had become friends on their own terms. And during the unraveling of his marriage, Mike had been never quite sure where Sarah's loyalties lay. He couldn't stand being the bad guy. Ann's hasty and unceremonious move to Tucson 4 months ago had shifted things with Sarah. When it had come up tonight, Mike had predicted producers of margarita mix would notice a steep sales drop in Michigan and a corresponding rise in Arizona. And Sarah had allowed herself a laugh. This sign of sympathy created an enormous sense of reprieve, as when a firing squad unexpectedly stands down. 2 sets of lights at intersections up ahead turned green at almost the same instant. They were so beautiful. All at once, the license plate on the SUV in front of him grew large and clear, like a line on an eye chart brought into sudden focus. He flopped his foot onto the brake, braced for impact. The SUV had just begun to accelerate, moving inches away as he came to a skidding stop. He had seen the light change from a distance and assumed the way was clear. Wow, he said to himself. Wow, wow, wow. Mike regripped the wheel at 10 and 2, established a safer following distance, and leaned forward slightly as if it would improve his vision. The irony was that after years of holding back because Ann was sliding into alcoholism, Mike was very drunk. He had evidently forgotten how to manage more than one beer. Things had been so shitty for years, but now they were looking up. At this precise moment, they were fantastic. He was almost used to being alone in the old cedar-shingled house. His son, Connor, a rising junior at the University of Michigan, wouldn't be coming home for the summer. This was consistent with Connor saying that Mike and Ann had fucked up and were a shit example for him. Connor, like his mother, had a knack for saying blunt and devastating things when stressed. But the real reason was Connor's excellent marketing internship with Google in Ann Arbor. Connor would be fine, and using his parents' catastrophic marriage as a negative example wouldn't be the worst thing. In any case, Mike didn't want this glorious night to end. He was tired of Netflixing Breaking Bad back at the house. Maybe he could meet someone or even get laid. Ann's departure had thrown him badly, but why not get back on the horse this very night? He was a single man, 50 years old, yes, but a good 50, a young 50. Mike believed there was no reason to decline physically at his age. For God's sake, a 57-year-old ex-Marine had recently set the world record for continuous abdominal planking, 5 hours, 15 minutes, and 15 seconds. Mike could plank for 4 minutes. This meant he had the potential to increase his plank time approximately 7,800% over the next 7 years. He couldn't be over a hill he had only just begun to climb. He approached the weird intersection where Kalamazoo Avenue split, 2 lanes curving left and up West Main Hill toward his house, and 1 lane curving right to merge with Douglas Avenue. At the last second, he made a no-look lane change and swooped onto Douglas. The night wasn't ending. He'd always wanted to see the sunset from the beach at Saugatuck Dunes State Park. With its ornate tree-limbed driftwood and picturesque boulder 20 yards from shore, it seemed the only place within a 50-mile radius that offered both soulful vistas and the possibility of a romantic encounter. He envisioned a bonfire ringed by single ladies and empty bottles of Pinot Grigio, divorcees, tragic young widows, wise-cracking loners at loose ends. Mike felt fortunate to be living in a golden age of attractive middle-aged women. He saw them everywhere, in his neighborhood, on campus, at the farmer's market. One such bored woman on the edge of the bonfire would invite him over and let him ask questions about her life. He was dying to know what made people happy and how they dealt with reality. He wondered why he'd never broached such topics more directly with others, including Anne. And if the beach was deserted, the shushing waves and the solitude would still foster spiritual reflection, or at least mindless enjoyment. He would pass out and sleep on the sand. He would wake up to seagulls landing on him, like morning birds perching on a Disney princess, nipping his pockets for signs of Cheetos. As he headed north on 131, the sun fell below the horizon, but the air was still lit somehow. In the span of a few miles, he passed a dead deer twisted in the breakdown lane, a tidy lump of inert raccoon, a licorice braid of shorn truck tire tread. Who moved these objects from the middle of the freeway? Why always carefully arranged? Why not remove altogether? The dashboard said it was 9:17 and 63 degrees outside. Dusk came late and took forever in this gently hilly and randomly forested edge of the Eastern time zone. The park would probably be closed when he got there, though running into the sort of people who would defy such rules seemed promising. The temp ticked down to 62, but he had a college hoodie on the back seat. He exited 131 and took M89 west through a dense commercial strip burning with superstores and fast food franchises. Early streetlights passed over his car like a great bright hand stroking a cat. He turned off the AC and cracked his window. The night air was humid and indeed cooling. On the other side of Otsego, he got up to speed again, rolling past the Lynx golf course through a sudden bank of ground fog that barred the road. Then on a straightaway, he saw patches of fog that were strangely discreet and well-organized, hovering masses about 1 story tall, no taller, taking the shape of long corridors or a whole warehouse-like building, floating over low-lying areas in the undulating earth. It was as if clouds had come in for a landing, or maybe this was how clouds were born before they rose up and took their place in the sky. He looked forward to the lake, which he now hoped would be eerie or surreal under the hazy moon. By the time he was on M40 heading toward Holland, the darkness had thickened and the ground fog was a problem. If it didn't sober him up, it at least focused him. Shoals of cloud dissipated just when he worried he couldn't see well enough to drive. Then he passed Bruce's party store, a friendly oasis. Windows blinded with beer prices. The parking lot lights seemed to disperse the fog. He went due west on 140th Avenue, then came back south on 65th Street, overshooting the road that led into the park. He had to stop and back up to make the turn. It was full night now, just after 10 p.m. He was in a maze of fog banks and clear ground. He wound down the road, broke through wisps into wider visibility, and saw the park ranger hut, dark inside but lit by an exterior lamp. The road split, and he bore right on a lane headed for the horseshoe parking lot. A mass of bushes loomed on his passenger side. In front of him, a wall of cottony fog, which he entered like an airplane entering a cloud. A tandem bicycle materialized in his path, 2 people on the bike, lit for an eternal instant, as if by a flashbulb, a young man on the front seat, polo shirt, board shorts, backwards ball cap, a woman on the back seat in an open, white, button-up shirt, the tail of which lay on her bare thigh as it depressed the bike pedal. The man's face was panicked, eyes magically locking on Mike's through the windshield. The woman's eyes were closed, expectant, more dreamy than alarmed, as if she were only jumping into a lake. bit from Mike. Now we're not going to get all the end of chapter 1. We're just going to jump to chapter 2. And Claire, who is sort of the second point of view character, married, mother of 2. She's the curator at the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts, and she has woken up extremely early this morning because she's worried about her children. Her son is supposed to be studying for the ACT, but he has been watching the Tigers nonstop. His daughter has just returned from her first year at college, and she is dating a Christian young man with a conservative background. And this is very troubling to her. So she's woken up way early. There was no hope of falling back asleep. She would make the most of this wakefulness and go for a run. She rolled out of bed. The shift in the mattress made Ryan turn onto his back and open one eye. "Are you getting up?" he asked groggily. "No, I'm lying next to you." Feels good," he said with his eyes closed, running a hand under the covers where she had been. "Have you lost weight?" "You're still dreaming," she said. She quietly dressed in her running clothes, unplugged her phone from its charger, and headed into the hallway. Nathan's door was closed. Emma's door was open. She smiled wickedly to herself. Had her daughter spent the night with Jeremy? Had Mr. Abstinence finally cracked? She turned on her phone to see if there was a text from Emma. While her phone booted up, she poked her head into Emma's room. No Emma on the unmade bed. About 3 days of clothes on the floor. The number of days she'd been home. A waxed Sweetwater's bag stood on the desk among empty glasses, crumb-sprinkled plates, and wrung tea bags staining napkins. No pictures or posters of any kind on the walls, not a single one. It had been this way even before she'd gone off to college. Claire wondered if the bareness was a rebuke or a deliberate withholding, as if her daughter didn't want to show her mother, an art museum curator who presented images and objects for a living, any outward sign of her interests, tastes, or affiliations. Instead, she dated a holy roller with pecs the size of footballs, who openly declared his desire to save himself for his wedding night. "He's got good values," Emma had said. "He treats people well." This was exactly the humanistic morality she and Ryan had worked so hard to teach their children, yet those words felt flung at her like the harshest accusation. Accusing her of what? She had spent many a night hoping, yes, hoping, she had to admit, for Emma to come home and announce that the mask had fallen off. He was a jerk, hypocrite fundamentalist. "He studied the Gospels, Mom. He says Jesus would be totally for LGBTQ rights." Their arguments often had the mystifying quality of a role reversal. Instead of acting like a jaded teenage know-it-all or bombarding her with "you don't understand," Emma yelled things like, "I know you have everything figured out, but I don't." "That's okay," she responded. "I don't expect you to, and I don't either." Oh, God, perfect answer. Emma had grumbled and stomped away. "Let's talk about what you're figuring out, okay?" Slam of bedroom door. Her phone was all booted up. No text from Emma. Fear, anger, fear, anger. She texted, "Where are you?" No instant answer. Emma's phone went right to voicemail. After the beep, as calmly as she could, she said, "Just checking in. Expected you home last night. Give me a call." Of course, Emma wasn't up yet. Claire herself normally wasn't up at this hour. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," she thought, a phrase she had frequently used with Emma when she had catastrophized about some debacle with her friends or worried about playing time on the volleyball team. So we're going to jump a little bit forward past the run. When she came in through the back door after her run, Ryan stood before open cupboards in his smiley face boxers and plain t-shirt, gut flab meeting uncertain resistance at his waistband, eyeing his cereal collection. "Don't rush me," he said, one finger raised. "This is a critical decision." He wiggled his fingers dramatically. Claire knew that Seinfeld had been famous for having a lot of cereal in his apartment. Ryan was a movie and TV quoter, able to reenact lengthy scenes with his friends, or on his own if need be, and she suspected his cereal collection was an homage to the show. She was sometimes stunned by, and jealous of, the ways in which he found gratification. Emma didn't come home last night, she said. Really, he replied, and drew out a box of Cinnamon Life. She poured herself a glass of water from the filtered pitcher on the counter and drank, hoping to calm herself before she spoke again. You didn't see her door was open? Now that you mention it, I do believe it was, he said, pouring his cereal into a bowl. So what do you think that means? Counsel was badgering the witness. Ryan was a lawyer in the county's front of the court office. He specialized in wringing child support from deadbeat dads, witnessing some of the most dysfunctional broken families in Southwest Michigan. She wondered if being schooled in all that nastiness gave him an unfair advantage in their arguments. You know, she said, it'd be good if you helped me carry the emotional ball sometimes. The emotional ball? He gave her a sideways look. The emotional ball? She doubted he would let her live that down. He could work a pet phrase for months at a time. He had just finally given up sarcastically adding, God willing, to everything. You know what I mean, the burden of caring. Who says I don't care? I care by not caring. Let her fuck up horribly, builds character. There was something to this. But had she waited up for Emma? No, she had let go. She had not helicoptered. Yet it wasn't like Emma to not say where she was going to be, and any red-blooded parent needed to be alarmed right now. Great, everything's fine. She threw up her hands and slipped into a doltish imitation of Ryan. If she's screwing up, it's fine. If she's fine, it's fine. Everything's fine. Well, since you've got this, I'm going to go just forget all about it and take a shower. She headed out of the kitchen, trying not to feel ridiculous. Ryan whistled, and there she goes, the only person in America in touch with reality. I'm a lucky man. That's right, she yelled back. She made it to her office early. More shipments were expected later today for an upcoming exhibition by Rita Bowman, a multimedia artist from Philadelphia. The theme was African religious ideas threading through Black urban communities. The artist was arriving Monday, and Claire would be working with her on the final layout, with an artist reception Thursday evening and a formal opening on Saturday. Most of the pieces had already arrived in copious bubble wrap and an absurd amount of tape that she had spent yesterday afternoon fighting through. She and Marta, the associate curator, had tentatively placed the art around the galleries on movers pads covering the terrazzo floor, or leaning against the walls, resting on carpet squares, roughly dividing them between the first and second half of the exhibition catalog. There were paintings, photographs, sculptures, a video installation, a church pulpit installation. In the meantime, the morning's task was trying to decide between two exhibitions for late fall, early winter, abstract paintings that looked like eruptions of molten spiraling matter in outer space, and a group show of representational artists. The usual Rubik's Cube of variables, cost, quality, audience appeal, organizational difficulty, timing, relationship to current, past, and future exhibits, likely board opinions, felt unusually intractable today. Teresa, the executive director, wanted her proposal by Monday. She usually had her phone on silent so she wouldn't be disturbed or forget to turn it off before a meeting and then have an interruption. But this morning she put the sound on because she needed to hear from Emma. A little after 9, 2 police officers wearing contrasting uniforms approached her open office door. Her shoulders seized, and she avoided looking at their faces like a child caught doing something bad. The colors of their uniforms drew her focus, maybe because raw color had always been a comfort to her. One tan, the other such a dark blue, it was almost black. Claire Boland, the dark blue officer said. That's all.
Terrific. Is that all right?
Oh, for sure.
All right. Thank you very much. That was terrific and really well chosen. Nicely done. Questions? Does anyone have questions for Andrew Mozina based on this reading or really anything? Yeah, we got a couple.
These are very different characters, and
Yeah.
you spend a lot of time with their internal voices.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how you sort of get in their headspace.
That is a great question. So, I don't know if everybody's hearing everything, but the question is, how do you get in the headspace of 2 very different characters? That's I wish I had a good answer to that, because then I would use that method to always do it. And I would feel better as a writer. But I think you kind of have to maybe start with what they care about and what they want and what they're worried about, and then notice how the circumstances they're in either press on or accentuate or aggravate those things. So maybe I took some things for her. She's a little bit, she's a curator, so I thought, well, maybe she's a little bit fussy, and so her husband maybe is a little bit of a goofball, and that aggravates her, but she's also drawn to it. So that's her, and then Mike, I sort of just clued in on him as a sort of a deluded economist, like an economist just run amok, and then also a very self-interested person. So I guess there are little touchstones, and then as they continually respond as they are to everything that happens, you can sort of predict what they need to think at that moment, if you want to go there. I don't know, but I wish I could really imagine somebody else's consciousness so fully that it would be convincing. That is my dream. Yeah. Yeah.
What drew you to writing like these two very different points of view in the first place?
I did want to do. The question is, what drew you to try these 2 points of view in the first place? And I did want to write about both sides of a hit and run, both the victim and the perpetrator, because I think those are both awful positions, and for some reason, I'm just drawn to awful situations. I was just thrilling to Roy's examples of accidents. I thought, this is great. No, not really. But so yeah, that was the basic choice, is to have those two, because I think that there's sort of this anti-hero thing that doesn't give enough attention to victims, and then being a victim is super complicated too. And so I wanted to have both of those sides as vividly as I could in the book. And then I'm very mechanically minded, so I thought I will just alternate chapters, and I do that for the entire book, which is probably bad form for some level, but that's what I did.
I don't know my Andrews. The sun is literally right in my
No,
eye.
I was
Right
thinking
behind
about
you.
that.
Thank you.
Yes, there we go. Thank you.
I can shut them all.
No,
That's
that's
perfect.
perfect.
That's perfect.
Yeah, Corey.
How did you come up with the idea behind the book?
Well, I have had my own share of biking. I used to bike to work in Boston every day, and I went over some hoods and got doored and that sort of thing. But maybe the biggest impetus was I wasn't paying attention one day, and I ran a red light in Kalamazoo, and Lori was with me, and I drove right into an intersection. I just drove straight into one. And I had a split second where I saw a car coming from my left, and I calmly thought, oh, don't even hit the brakes, there's no point, it's all over. What a dumb way to ruin your life by just driving right into a red light. This is so stupid. And then luckily my foot went ahead and pressed the brake, and we stopped, I don't know, maybe inches from that other car. It was very close. Lori maybe had covered her eyes at that point and screamed. And I did think, like, wow, you can really mess something up just in any given moment. And my mom used to always say, when she was trying to scare us into behaving, she would, you're jumping off the garage roof into a snowbank, she would say, in 1 second. And at a certain point, she didn't have to finish that sentence. It just meant in 1 second, you could do the thing that destroys everything forever. And it's sort of, it's a good mom idea, a good parental idea. It also induces a little bit of, paranoia about living. So I was really fascinated by how wrong something can go so quickly. And then I wanted to do, and I felt so lucky that I had not hit that person, or we hadn't been hit. So I was really drawn to that. Yeah.
So in the first chapter, and I don't think it's a secret, he hits the riders. Right?
Yeah.
And it's a horrific scene, but then in the next page, he's kind of justifying running away from it. Using, he cites, quotes an economic theorist, Pareto, and I laughed, and it was a little bit uncomfortable.
Yes.
So how do you juggle that comic and tragic?
I don't know, and I think it's kind of a curse because in the book world, it's just tonally. I mean, Roy put the best possible spin on it. Oh, it's tonally modulated, but I did have one, and the publisher wanted to sell this as a comedy, which I did not want to do, but we had so many fights over content that when it came time to doing that stuff, I just let him mostly do what he wanted. But okay, how do I answer that really? I think it's some things are funny and some things are not funny, and the trick with this book was just knowing when it was so awful that the action done in response to the awful thing was ironic and funny and satirizable, sort of. I don't know if that's getting at what you're asking, but it was sort of a tightrope, and I do love that mix of tones. And I remember reading, maybe you guys have read this, that when Kafka used to read his stories to his buddies in these cafes and bars, people would crack up laughing, and he would laugh too. And if you read stories like The Judgment or, In the Penal Colony, they're not laughers, but at a certain point, they get there, or the awfulness gets to that level. And I kind of like that, where awfulness kind of bends around into a certain type of humor. Yeah. Yes.
I'm wondering, once you finish the first draft and you figure out the characters
Yeah.
to an extent, and you go back and you revise, and you realize, wait, this is not the right voice, this is actually the other person's voice. Did that ever happen to you when you're cleaning up the voices?
I did actually. I noticed some I had to distinguish between some vocab words for the same thing, and I wish I could remember the example, but I remember going, okay, only Claire will be the only one who uses that word for that thing in that situation, and Mike's going to use this word, because I saw myself fudging this. That back to your question, that you have your own patterns of speech and interpreting the world, and naturally when you're trying to get the thing down, you do that. But I did go through the whole book and made a diction check that I thought that's not a Mike word, or that is a Mike word, or that's a Claire word, and then so I did have to do that. That's for sure, Yeah.
So I've never been to Kalamazoo, but I feel like maybe I have a little bit now after hearing you read.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you had an actual map where you drew out the route for this drive. But if more broadly, you could just talk a little bit how you think about using geography and space in your stories.
Yeah, using geography and space, I don't have a very good memory, and I feel the writers that I love are super vivid in their writing, and I see that movie in my head, and so I was like, how can I do this? And I'll say, I'll just set it in Kalamazoo. This problem could really take place in Kalamazoo. And so I used all the spaces, I used even the very bushes I just drove everywhere that he drove, and I sat there in my car at night as the sun went down, and I noticed certain things, and I noticed that this is where the bike could have come out, because there was this massive bushes here, and if you do, and there's all kinds of ground fog that develops by Lake Michigan in April, and so I used reality as a crutch, because I don't have a great visual memory. I need to like almost be like sketching it from a live model to actually get details right. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have any people or actors in mind when you were writing the characters, of kind of getting them, seeing what they were doing, acting like?
No, I didn't. That was no. I didn't, I know people who have had their books made into movies and they fantasize about that stuff, and they have a real reason to, and sometimes it actually happens, but I have nowhere near that. Yeah, Mike.
So, you've had a long and illustrious career in college teaching.
Yeah, just stop there, Mike. That's great.
And so I'm just thinking, as you're developing Mike's character, you have a literal panoply of academic disciplines that he could come from, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking, why the dismal science here and not, say, mathematics? Or
Yeah. I think economics is just a great discipline for rationalization.
Yeah.
And I was an econ major, so for those of you who are into writing and maybe have other interests, I think that's awesome. And it took me a while to find my way from econ into writing, but I think that that was why I chose that. And early on, the Pareto optimality thing, where the idea is that it's a state of economic affairs. I don't know if it's true, where you can't make somebody, where you don't, if you make one person better off, you're likely to make someone else worse off. And that really helped me think about how, because it's hard to rationalize what Mike does by leaving the scene of the crime, because he's basically a decent guy. But those economic concepts like Pareto optimality, there are concepts in the legal world about torts that involve economics and probability and stuff like that. So it just kind of suited the situation, kind of. Yeah.
You're about there?
Yeah.
All right. Can we get one more round of applause?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was excellent. If you're wondering, if you see someone and you're wondering if they're an economist, they're the ones lying on the floor just crying. That's how you know. I guess that could also be a history teacher or, yeah. Thank you very much for coming out. This was delightful. Keep your eye on your email for news of our final event, the senior reading, which will be coming up in a couple of weeks. Please stick around if you're inclined. Buy a book, buy a broadside, finish up the catering, and we will see you